Alright, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a look at an MSI Z790 motherboard, the Tomahawk WIFI DDR4. This motherboard is, it's one of the unique ones in the fact that it uses DDR4 instead of DDR5 with the Raptor Point S Z790 chipset. So you basically, any 12th or 13th generation CPU will work with DDR4 on this motherboard. However, you still get PCI 5.0 for 16 lanes from the CPU. So let's take a look at the accessories. Now, opening this one up, here we go. We have the motherboard here. Everything looks good. Comes in an anti-static bag, as usual. Alright. Accessories. You get some stickers here. Oh, you're in this direction. So you get some case stickers, cable stickers, and basically like MSI case badges and stuff, so in case you want to put that on your case. Now you get a European Union regulatory guide. No one needs that. And a quick install guide. So in case you don't have a computer to boot this USB stick on, which has all your drivers and a manual, I assume, on here. 16 gigabyte stick, by the way. And it's all metal in case you want to put it on a keychain. It's less likely to come off. So if you don't have that, this will tell you like the pinouts for power, stuff like that. How to install the CPU, all that stuff. And here you have two Wi-Fi antenna for the wireless 6G, or wireless, not 6G, wireless 6E. And then here you have 4 SATA connectors, and of course your M.2, basically the kind of extra screws and standoffs, stuff like that. So whatever you need to get started. Now the motherboard itself. Let's take it out of this. Put that stuff aside. Actually, I'm going to move this out of the way. Okay. This is the motherboard on its glory. I have to zoom out for this. It's only me today, so... Okay. So the motherboard looks pretty good. You have heat sinks all over the VRMs. You have a 16 plus 1 phase voltage regulator. You have 1 phase for the iGPU, 1 for the auxiliary. And your socket is here. You have all these M.2 ports, okay? This motherboard has 4 M.2 ports and actually labeled under the heatsink. So M.2 port 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now this one is routed to the CPU, bypasses the chipset. So these other 3 are routed to the chipset. But anyways, this one is PCI 4.0 from the CPU. So there's no switching between the top M.2 slot and this slot, because this is always going to be by 16 from the CPU, whether that's 5.0, 4.0, whatever your GPU supports. Okay, you got your 4 DDR4 slots right here, which is pretty cool. You got tons of fan headers. Okay, this motherboard has a plethora of fan headers. And you know what? Might as well start taking off these M.2 heat sinks. Yeah, why not? Why don't we give that a shot first? Okay. So the M.2 heat sinks. Wrong direction. They're held down by 2 screws each, and the good thing about these screws is that they don't come all the way out. They basically just like hold in place. All the M.2 slots have a thermal pad here, and I believe this is 7 watts per millikelvin. So this is from the CPU, so it won't steal bandwidth and it won't go through the chipset. The chipset has 3 slots. These are all by 4 PCIe 4.0 NVMe, including the one from the CPU. However, slot number 3 right here will also support a SATA drive. But if you do that, you lose this one SATA port here. When we zoom in, we'll go over that in more detail. So this is number 2. Same thing here, thermal pad, and the screws, they basically stay in place, which is nice, because that way you don't have like 50 screws all over the place. And then your last one is a long one, so keep in mind, and I did see a comment on this on another board, if you do use one of these slots and your M.2 card or M.2 device comes with a heatsink built into it, okay, because a lot of the faster NVMe 4.0 drives do, and I'm sure PCI 5.0, the 5th generation of NVMe drives, they will also probably come with their own heatsinks. If they don't, sure, use the include heatsink. However, keep in mind that if only you use the heatsink that comes with it instead of taking it off, which I recommend you probably use the one that comes with the drive, then this one you're going to expose all of this. So if you only put it in one of these 2 slots, then you can't put the heatsink back on half of it, you know, because it's just one piece. It's like one giant piece. So that's that. You have a few other PCIe slots. This is a PCIe 3.0 by 1 slot, okay? So this goes to the chipset. This is a PCIe 4.0 by 4 slot, and this also goes to the chipset. The good news on this slot is actually redriven. So this has its own redrivers, which is cool, and we're obviously going to cover that as we always do. But yeah, so the CPU lanes all go here, and nothing is routed differently, so it's all good there. Let's zoom in a little bit and go over. Actually, you know what? Why don't we do the I/O shield? Alright, so let's take a look at the rear I/O shield of the motherboard. First, you have DisplayPort 1.4, and that does support 8K at 60 Hz. You also have HDMI 2.0. You have a BIOS flash and a BIOS clear seamless button. And so basically, if an unreleased CPU comes out at this moment and it matches the socket, like it's a 13 something that features, I don't know, something different, this motherboard will support it even with no CPU in the motherboard, or without support currently in the BIOS for that CPU that's already on the motherboard. You can use that BIOS to flash it without CPU or DRAM, I believe, in it. Moving on, you have 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports. They're in blue, and these ports, they're I think they're through a hub, but obviously it comes from the chipset to begin with. But yeah, so you got 4 of those, and then all the red ones are USB 3.2 Gen 2. Those are 10 gigabits per second, and they're all directly routed to the chipset. You have 2 Type-C ports, okay? You have a one here that's 10 gigabits per second. Now that one is also directly routed to the CPU, so that's USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C. Then USB 3.2 Gen 2 by 2 over here, 20 gigabits per second, and that's also to the CPU. Then you have a 2.5 gigabit LAN here. Now this 2.5 gigabit LAN port is from an Intel, I believe it's the i226, sorry, an i226V. So it's the newer one. And then you have Wi-Fi here, and that's also from Intel Wi-Fi 6E, and that's from a AX211 controller. You also have 7.1 audio ports with S/PDIF out. So you have like all the audio ports you need. MSI did a decent job with that here. Now, let's zoom in and take a look at some of the features on the motherboard. Alright, starting off from this side of the motherboard, you have 2 8-pin connectors. So this motherboard can easily provide, even on like pretty bad PSU wiring and stuff like that, that's out of the control of the motherboard, 600 watts through these 2 connectors. Because I think worst case scenario for these is like 300 watts each. Then you have some headers over here right next to the CPU. And we can see that these are 2 fan headers. This motherboard has a total of 8 fan headers, okay? Now these 2 are different than all the other ones we're going to look at. This one is a CPU fan header. It is rated, I believe, 2 amps. And this one can auto-sense between DC and PWM mode control, okay? And that's pretty nifty. This is a PWM pump header. So, or it's a pump header. All the ports can have their modes changed. But by default, this auto senses the CPU one. The pump one is by default PWM, and it's rated up to 3 amps. Okay, so this one is auto sense 2 amps, and this one is 3 amps PWM. Now the system fan headers, of which you will see, I believe, well, there's 6. You'll see 5 more of these. These are rated 1 amp each. Okay. And by default, they're in DC or PW or DC/voltage mode, whatever you want to call it. These 2 are 2 addressable RGB LED headers, and they are the version 2. Okay. Here you have system status LEDs. There are 4 of them. So, because there's no diagnostic LED on this motherboard, this is the diagnostic LED. There's no postcode. Okay. Now, obviously, we have our other headers here. You have your 24-pin power, but then this is a USB 3.2 Gen 1 internal header. This is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 internal header, so it's 10 gigabits per second, and this is a Type-C header, okay? Here we have SATA, and as far as SATA goes, you have a bunch of them here. Now, 4 of these are from the chipset. 2 of them are from an AS Media controller. I believe these 2 are from AS Media. So you can RAID all 4 of these, and then there's another one here. That's from the chipset too. So anything from the chipset you can RAID. This one, however, shares with that M.2 slot I was talking about earlier, M.23. So if you use that slot, you can use a SATA port, but if you do use it, it will disable this. Okay. They share bandwidth. I guess that's the proper terminology. So moving on. Try not to scratch this table up too much more. Front panel headers, and yeah, those are what those are. You have a trusted module platform. You have that SATA I discussed. You have another system fan header. Okay, I didn't miss any of those. Two USB 2.0 headers. They come from a hub, but they are connected to the chipset. Three internal system fan headers here. The other one is up by the top of the graphics port. Then you have yeah, trusted platform, and you do have some kind of reset button header or a safe boot mode header on this motherboard too. I actually believe it might be in this area right here. There are a bunch of headers here that are undefined, and I think they're for from what I can find, they're like for internal use, for diagnostics and stuff. Anyways, you get two you get two more RGB headers, but this one is addressable version 2, okay? And this one is just normal RGB, not addressable. And then you have this header here is like it's one of those headers where it's for demoing the board RGBs. This motherboard really doesn't have RGBs like that, so yeah. And then audio header here, and this is where your last fan header is. I said right above the GPU slot, so it's right here. Yeah, so next step is to be taking it apart and looking at something. But I want to go over one more thing before we do that. The back of this motherboard is an interesting little feature. This little hole right here, I don't know if you guys can see it. That little hole right there goes directly through the PCB to the underside of the CPU. And basically that means that you could stick a little thermocouple up in there. Probably wouldn't fit anything that would be attached to the motherboard and like you stick elsewhere in your case. But if you're doing like liquid nitrogen overclocking, stuff like that, and you have like an extra thermocouple, you could probably put it in there. But hopefully it wouldn't short out the bottom of your CPU. So yeah, let's start taking apart this motherboard and go over the rest of it.